Section 36 of The Interpretation of Dreams. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Interpretation of Dreams by Sigmund Freud. Translated by A. Brill. Section 36. The Affects in Dreams. Part 1. A shrewd remark of Stricker's called our attention to the fact that the expression of affects in dreams cannot be disposed of in the contemptuous fashion in which we are wont to shake off the dream content after we have waked. If I am afraid of robbers in my dreams, the robbers, to be sure, are imaginary, but the fear of them is real. And the same thing is true if I rejoice in my dream. According to the testimony of our feelings, an affect experienced in a dream is in no way inferior to one of like intensity experienced in waking life, and the dream presses its claims to be accepted as a part of our real psychic experiences by virtue of its affective rather than its ideational content. In the waking state, we do not put the one before the other, since we do not know how to evaluate an affect psychically except in connection with an ideational content. If an affect and an idea are ill matched as regards their nature or their intensity, our waking judgment becomes confused. The fact that in dreams the ideational content does not always produce the affective result which in our waking thoughts we should expect as its necessary consequence has always been a cause of astonishment. Strumpel declared that ideas in dreams are stripped of their psychic values. But there is no lack of instances in which the reverse is true. When an intensive manifestation of affect appears in a content which seems to offer no occasion for it. In my dream, I may be in a horrible, dangerous, or disgusting situation, and yet I may feel no fear or aversion. On the other hand, I am sometimes terrified by harmless things, and sometimes delighted by childish things. This enigma disappeared more suddenly and more completely than perhaps any other dream problem if we pass from the manifest to the latent content. We shall then no longer have to explain it, for it will no longer exist. Analysis tells us that the ideational contents have undergone displacements and substitutions, while the effects have remained unchanged. No wonder, then, that the ideational content, which has been altered by dream distortion, no longer fits the effect which has remained intact, and no cause for wonder when analysis has put the correct content into its original place. The night before its father was to return to the front, the child cried out, sobbing violently, "Papa, Papa, baby!" That may mean, let Papa and baby still be together. While the weeping takes cognizance of the imminent departure, the child was at the time very well able to express the concept of separation. Fort, away replaced by a peculiarly accented long drawn out ooh, has been his first word, and for many months before this first dream, he had played at away with all his toys, which went back to his early self conquest in allowing his mother to go away. In a psychic complex which has been subjected to the influence of the resisting censorship, the effects are unyielding constituent, which alone can guide us to the correct completion. This state of affairs is revealed in the psychoneurosis even more distinctly than in dreams. Here the affects is always in the right, at least as regards its quality. Its intensity may, of course, be increased by displacement of neurotic attention. When the hysterical patient wonders that he should be so afraid of a trifle, or when the sufferer from the obsessions is astonished that he should reproach himself so bitterly for a mere nothing, they are both in error, inasmuch as they regard long conceptual content, the trifle, the mere nothing, as the essential thing, and they defend themselves in vain, because they make this conceptual content the starting point of their thought work. Psychoanalysis, however, puts them on the right path, inasmuch as it recognizes that, on the contrary, it is the affect that is justified, and looks for the concept which pertains to it, and which has been repressed by a substitution. All that we need to assume is that the liberation of affect and conceptual content do not constitute the indissoluble organic unity as which we are wont to regard them, but that the two parts may be welded together so that analysis will separate them. Dream interpretation shows that this is actually the case. I will first of all give an example in which analysis explains the apparent absence of affect in a conceptual content which ought to compel a liberation of affect. 1. The dreamer sees three lions in a desert, one of which is laughing, but she is not afraid of them. Then, however, she must have fled from them, for she is trying to climb a tree. But she finds that her cousin, the French teacher, is already up in the tree, etc. The analysis yields the following material. The indifferent occasion of the dream was a sentence in the dreamer's English exercise. The lion's greatest adornment is his mane. Her father used to wear a beard which encircled his face like a mane. The name for her English teacher is Miss Lyon. An acquaintance of hers sent her the ballads of Louvet. Louvet means lion. These then are the three lions. Why should she be afraid of them? She has read a story in which a negro, who has incited his fellows to revolt, is hunted with bloodhounds, and climbs a tree to save himself. Then follow fragmentary recollections in the merriest mood, such as the following directions for catching lions. From Die Fliegende Blätter. Take a desert and put it through a sieve, the lions will be left behind. Also a very amusing but not very proper anecdote about an official who is asked why he does not take greater pains to win the favour of his chief, and who replies that he has not been trying to creep into favour, but that his immediate superior was already up there. The whole matter becomes intelligible as soon as one learns that on the dream day the lady had received a visit from her husband's superior. He was very polite to her and kissed her hand, and she was not at all afraid of him, although he is a big bug. Grosses Tier means big animal, and plays the part of a social lion in the capital of her country. This lion is, therefore, like the lion in A Midsummer's Night Dream, who is unmasked as the snug the joiner. And of such stuff are all the dream lions of which one is not afraid. 2. As my second example, I will cite the dream of a girl who saw her sister's little son lying as a corpse in his coffin, but who, it may be added, was conscious of no pain or sorrow. Why she was unmoved, we know from the analysis. The dream only disguised her wish to see once more the man she loved. The affect had to be attuned to the wish, and not to its disguisement. There was thus no occasion for sorrow. In a number of dreams, the affect does at least remain connected with the conceptual content, which has replaced the content really belonging to it. In others, the dissolution of the complex is carried farther. The affect is entirely separated from the idea belonging to it, and finds itself accommodated elsewhere in the dream, where it fits into the new arrangement of the dream elements. We have seen that the same thing happens to acts of judgments in dreams. If an important inference occurs in the dream thoughts, there is one in the dream also, but the inference in the dream may be displaced by the entirely different material. Not infrequently this displacement is effected in accordance with the principles of antithesis. I will illustrate the latter possibility by the following dream, which I have subjected to the most exhaustive analysis. 3. A castle by the sea. Afterwards it lies directly not on the coast, but on the narrow canal leading to the sea. A certain Herr P is the governor of the castle. I stand with him in a large salon with three windows, in front of which rise the projections of a wall, like battlements of a fortress. I belong to the garrison, perhaps as a volunteer naval officer. We fear the arrival of enemy warships, for we are in a state of war. Herr P intends to leave the castle. He gives me instructions as to what must be done if what we fear should come to pass. His sick wife and his children are in the threatened castle. As soon as the bombardment begins, the large hall is to be cleared. He breathes heavily and tries to get away. I detain him and ask him how I am to send him news in case of need. He says something further, and immediately afterwards he sinks into the floor dead. I have probably taxed him unnecessarily with my questions. After his death, which causes no further impression upon me, I consider whether the window is to remain in the castle, whether I should give notice of the death to the higher command, whether I should take over the control of the castle as the next in command. I now stand at the window and scrutinize the ships as they pass. They are cargo steamers, and they rush by over the dark water, several with more than one funnel, others with bulging decks. These are very like the railway stations in the preliminary dream which has not been related. Then my brother is standing beside me, and we both look out of the window onto the canal. At the sight of one ship, we are alarmed and call out, "Here comes the warship!" It turns out, however, that they are only the ships which I have already seen returning. Now comes a small ship, comically truncated, so that it ends amidships. On the deck, one sees curious things like cups or little boxes. We call out as with one voice, "This is the breakfast ship." The rapid motion of the ships, the deep blue of the water, the brown smoke of the funnels, all these together produce an intense and gloomy impression. The localities in this dream are compiled from several journeys to the Adriatic: Miramare, Duino, Venice, Aquileia, a short but enjoyable Easter trip to Aquileia with my brother, a few weeks before the dream, was still fresh in my memory. Also the naval war between America and Spain, and associated with this my anxiety as to the fate of my relatives in America, play a part in the dream. Manifestations of affect appear at two places in the dream. In one place, an affect that would be expected is lacking. It expressly emphasized that the death of the governor makes no impression upon me. At another point, when I see warships, I am frightened, and experience all the sensations of fright in my sleep. The distribution of affects in this well constructed dream has been effected in such a way that any obvious contradiction is avoided. For there is no reason why I should be frightened at governor's death, and it is fitting that, as the commander of the castle, I should be alarmed by the sight of the warship. Now analysis shows that Harpy is nothing but a substitute for my own ego. In the dream I am a substitute. I am the governor who suddenly dies. The dream thoughts deal with the future of my family after my premature death. No other disagreeable thought is to be found among the dream thoughts. The alarm which goes off with the sight of the warship must be transferred from it to this disagreeable thought. Inversely, the analysis shows that the region of the dream thoughts from which the warship comes is laden with most cheerful reminiscence. In Venice, a year before the dream, one magically beautiful day, we stood at the window of our room on the Riva Schiavoni and looked out over the blue lagoon, on which there was more traffic to be seen than usual. Some English ships were expected. They were to be given a festive reception, and suddenly my wife cried, happy as a child, "Here comes the English warship!" In the dream I am frightened by the very same words. Once more, we see that the speeches in dreams have their origin in speeches in real life. I shall presently show that even the element English in the speech has not been lost for the dream work. Here, then, between the dream thoughts and the dream content, I turn joy into fright, and I need only point to the fact that by means of this transformation I give expression to the fact of the latent dream content. The example shows, however, that the dream work is at liberty to detach the occasion of an affect from its connection in the dream thoughts, and to insert it at any other place it chooses in the dream content. I will take the opportunity which is here incidentally offered of subjecting to a closer analysis the breakfast ship, whose appearance in the dream so absurdly concludes a situation that has been rationally adhered to. If I look more closely at this dream object, I am impressed after the event by the fact that it was black, and that by reason of its truncation at its widest beam it achieved, at the truncated end a considerable resemblance to an object which had aroused our interest in the Museum of Etruscan Studies. This object was a rectangular cup of black clay with two handles, upon which stood things like coffee cups or tea cups, very similar to our modern service for the breakfast table. Upon inquiry, we learned that this was the toilette set of an Etruscan lady with little boxes of rouge and powder, and we told one another jestingly that it would not be a bad idea to take things like that home to the lady of the house. The dream object, therefore, signifies a black toilette. Toilette means dress, or mourning, and refers directly to a death. The other end of the dream object reminds us of a boat. German Naken, from the Greek root nekos, as a philological friend informs me, upon which corpses were laid in prehistoric times and were left to be buried by the sea. This is associated with the return of the ships in the dream. Silently on this rescued boat the old man drifts into harbour. It is the return voyage after the shipwreck. German Schiffbruch, meaning shipbreaking. The breakfast ship looks as though it were broken off amidships. But whence comes the name breakfast ship? This is where the English comes in, which we left over from the warships. Breakfast, a breaking of the fast. Breaking again belongs to the shipwreck, Schiffbruch, and fasting is associated with the black, mourning. But the only thing about this breakfast ship which has been newly created by the dream is its name. The thing existed in reality, and recalls to me one of the merriest moments of my last journey. As we discussed the fare in Aquileia, we took some food with us from Gueres, and bought a bottle of excellent Istrian wine in Aquileia. And while the little mail steamer slowly travelled through the canal Delme and into the lonely expanse of a lagoon in the direction of Grado, we had breakfast on the deck in the highest spirits. We were the only passengers, and it tasted to us as few breakfasts have ever tasted. This, then, was the breakfast ship, and it is behind this very recollection of the gayest joie de vivre that the dream hides the saddest thoughts of an unknown and mysterious future. The detachment of affects from the groups of ideas which have occasioned their liberations is the most striking thing that happens to them in dream formation, but is neither the only nor even the most essential change which they undergo on the way from the dream thoughts to the manifest dream. If the affects in the dream thoughts are compared with those in the dream, one thing at once becomes clear. Wherever there is an affect in the dream, it is to be found also in the dream thoughts. The converse, however, is not true. In general, a dream is less rich in affects than the psychic material from which it is elaborated. When I have reconstructed the dream thoughts, I see that the most intense psychic impulses are constantly striving in them for self assertion, usually in conflict with others which are sharply opposed to them. Now, if I turn back to the dream, I often find it colorless and devoid of any very intensive affective tone. Not only the content, but also the affective tone of my thoughts is often reduced by the dream work to the level of the indifferent. I might say that the suppression of affects has been accomplished by dream work. Take, for example, the dream of a botanical monograph. It corresponds to a passionate plea for my freedom to act as I am acting, to arrange my life as it seems right to me, and to me alone. The dream which results from this sounds indifferent. I have written a monograph, it is lying before me, it is provided with color plates, and the dried plants are to be found in each copy. It is like the peace of a deserted battlefield. No trace is left of the tumult of the battle. But things may turn out quite differently. Vivid expressions of affect may enter into the dream itself, but we will first of all consider the unquestioned fact that so many dreams appear indifferent, whereas it is never possible to go deeply into the dream thoughts without deep emotion. The complete theoretical explanation of the suppression of affects during the dream work cannot be given here. It would require a most careful investigation of the theory of affects and of the mechanism of repression. Here I can put forward only two suggestions. I am forced, for other reasons, to conceive the liberation of affects as a centrifugal process directed towards the interior of the body, analogous to the process of motor and secretory innervation. Just as in the sleeping state the emission of motor impulses towards the outer world seems to be suspended, so the centrifugal awakening of affects by unconscious thinking during sleep may be rendered more difficult. The affective impulses which occur during the course of the dream thoughts may thus in themselves be feeble, so that those that find their way into the dream are no stronger. According to this line of thought, the suppression of affects would not be a consequence of the dream work at all, but a consequence of the state of sleep. This may be so, but it cannot possibly be all the truth. We must remember that all more complex dreams have revealed themselves as the result of compromise between conflicting psychic forces. On the one hand, the wish forming thoughts have to oppose the contradiction of a censorship. On the other hand, as we have often seen, even in unconscious thinking, every train of thought is harnessed to its contradictory counterpart. Since all these train of thoughts are capable of arousing affects, we shall, broadly speaking, hardly go astray if we conceive the suppression of affects as the result of inhibition, which contrasts impose upon one another, and the censorship upon the urges which it has suppressed. The inhibition of affects would accordingly be the second consequence of the dream censorship, just as the dream distortion as the first consequence. I will here insert an example of a dream in which the indifferent emotional tone of the dream content may be explained by the antagonism of the dream thoughts. I must relate the following short dream, which every reader will read with disgust. 4. Rising ground, and on it something like an open air latrine, a very long bench, at the end of which is a wide aperture. The whole of the back edge is thickly covered with little heaps of excrement of all sizes and degrees of freshness. A thicket behind the bench. I urinate upon the bench. A long stream of urine rinses everything clean. The patches of excrement come off easily and fall into the opening. Nevertheless, it seems as though something remained at the end. Why did I experience no disgust in this dream? Because, as the analysis shows, the most pleasant and gratifying thoughts have cooperated in the formation of this dream. Upon analyzing it, I immediately think of Eugen's stables, which are cleansed by Hercules. I am this Hercules. The rising ground and the thicket belong to Ozzy, where my children are now staying. I have discovered the infantile etiology of the neurosis, and have thus guarded my own children from falling ill. The bench, omitting the aperture of course, is the faithful copy of a piece of furniture of which an affectionate female patient has made me a present. This reminds me how my patients honor me. Even the museum of human excrement is susceptible of gratifying interpretation. However much it disgusts me, it is a souvenir of the beautiful land of Italy, where in the small cities, as everyone knows, the privies are not equipped in any other way. The stream of urine that washes everything clean is an unmistakable allusion to greatness. It is in this manner that Gulliver extinguishes the great fire in Lilliput. To be sure, he thereby incurs the displeasure of the tiniest of queens. In this way, too, Garantua, the superman of Master Rabelais, takes vengeance upon the Parisians. Styling Notre Dame. Only yesterday I was turning over the leaves of Garnier's illustration of Rabelais before I went to bed, and strangely enough, here is another proof that I am the superman. The platform of Notre Dame was my favorite nook in Paris. Every free afternoon I used to go up into the towers of the cathedral, and there clamber about between the monsters and the gargoyles. The circumstance that all the excrement vanishes so rapidly before the stream of urine corresponds to the motto Afflevit et dissipati sunt, which I shall some day make the title of a chapter on the therapeutics of hysteria. And now as to the affective occasion of the dream. It had been a hot summer afternoon. In the evening, I had given my lecture on the connection between hysteria and perversions, and everything which I had to say displeased me thoroughly and seemed utterly valueless. I was tired. I took not the least pleasure in my difficult work, and longed to get away from this rummaging in human filth, first to see my children. and then to revisit the beauties of Italy. In this mood, I went from the lecture hall to a cafe to get some little refreshment in the open air, for my appetite had forsaken me. But a member of my audience went with me. He begged for permission to sit with me while I drank my coffee and gulped down my roll, and began to say flattering things to me. He told me how much he had learned from me, that he now saw everything through different eyes, that I had cleansed the Augean tables of error and prejudice which encumbered the theory of neurosis. In short, that I was a very great man. My mood was ill suited to this hymn of praise. I struggled with my disgust, and went home earlier in order to get rid of him. And before I went to sleep, I turned over the leaves of Rebellias, and read a short story by C.F. Mayer entitled Die Leiden eines Knaben, The Sorrows of a Boy. The dream had originated from this material, and Mayer's novel had supplied the recollections of scenes of childhood. The day's mood of annoyance and disgust is continued in the dream, inasmuch as it is permitted to furnish nearly all the material for the dream content. But during the night, the opposite mood of vigorous, even more immoderate self assertion, awakened and dissipated the earlier mood. The dream had to assume such a form as would accommodate both the expressions of self depreciation and exaggerated self glorification in the same material. The compromise formation resulted in an ambiguous dream content, but owing to the mutual inhibition of opposites, in an indifferent emotional tone. According to the theory of wish fulfillment, this dream would not have been possible had it not opposed and indeed suppressed, yet pleasure emphasized megalomaniac train of thought been added to the thoughts of disgust. For nothing painful is intended to be represented in dreams. The painful element of our daily thoughts are able to force their way into our dreams only if at the same time they are able to disguise a wish fulfillment. The dream work is able to dispose of the effects of dream thoughts in yet another way than by admiring them or reducing them to zero. It can transform them into their opposites. We are acquainted with the rule that for the purposes of the interpretation every element of the dream may represent its opposite as well as itself. One can never tell beforehand which is to be posited. Only the context can decide this point. A suspicion of this state of affairs has evidently found its way into the popular consciousness. The dream books, in their interpretations, often proceed according to the principle of contraries. This transformation into the contrary is made possible by the intimate associate ties which in our thoughts connect the idea of a thing with that of its opposite. Like every other displacement, this serves the purpose of the censorship. But it is often the work of wish fulfillment, for wish fulfillment consists in nothing more than the substitution of an unwelcome thing by its opposite. Just as concrete images may be transformed into their contraries in our dreams, so also may the effects of the dream thoughts. And it is probable that this inversion of effects is usually brought about by the dream censorship. The suppression and inversion of affects is useful even in social life, as is shown in the familiar analogy of the dream censorship, and above all, hypocrisy. If I am conversing with a person to whom I must show consideration, while I should like to address him as an enemy, it is almost more important that I should conceal the expression of my affect from him than that I should modify the verbal expressions of my thoughts. If I address him with courteous terms, but accompany them by looks and gestures of hatred and disdain, the effect which I produce upon him is not very different from which it would have been had I cast my unmitigated contempt into his face. Above all, then the censorship bids me suppress my affects, and if I am a master of the art of dissimulation, I can hypocritically display the opposite effect, smiling where I should like to be angry, and pretending affection where I should like to destroy. We have already had an excellent example of such an inversion of affect in the service of the dream censorship. In the dream of my uncle's beard, I feel great affection for my friend R, while, and because, the dream thoughts berate him as a simpleton. From this example of the inversion of affects, we derived our first proof of the existence of the censorship. Even here, it is not necessary to assume that the dream work creates a counter effect of this kind that is altogether new. It usually finds it lying ready in the material of the dream thoughts and merely intensifies it with psychic force of defense motives until it is able to predominate in the dream formation. In the dream of my uncle, the affectionate counter effect probably has its origin in an infantile source, as the continuation of the dream would suggest. For owing to the peculiar nature of my earliest childhood experiences, the relation of uncle and nephew has become the source of all my friendships and hatreds. An excellent example of such reversal of effect is found in a dream recorded by Ferenczi. An elderly gentleman was awakened at night by his wife, who was frightened because he laughed so loudly and uncontrollably in his sleep. The man afterwards related that he had had the following dream. I lay in my bed. A gentleman known to me came in. I wanted to turn on the light, but I could not. I attempted to do so repeatedly, but in vain. Thereupon my wife got out of the bed in order to help me, but she, too, was unable to manage it. Being ashamed of her negligee in the presence of the gentleman, she finally gave it up and went back to her bed. All this was so comical that I had to laugh terribly. My wife said, "What are you laughing at? What are you laughing at?" But I continued to laugh until I woke. The following day the man was extremely depressed and suffered from headache. From too much laughter, which shook me up, he thought. Analytically considered, the dream looks less comical. In the latent dream thoughts, the gentleman known to him is the image of death as the great unknown, which is awakened in his mind on the previous day. The old gentleman who suffers from arteriosclerosis had good reason to think of death on the day before the dream. The uncontrollable laughter takes the place of weeping and sobbing at the idea that he has to die. It is the light of the life that he is no longer able to turn on. This mournful thought may be associated itself with failure to effect sexual intercourse, which he had attempted shortly before this, and which the assistance of his wife, en negligee, was of no avail. He realized that he was already on the decline. The dream work knew how to transform the sad idea of impotence and death into a comic scene and the sobbing into laughter. There is one class of dreams which has a special claim to be hypocritical, and which severely tests the theory of wish fulfillment. My attention was called to them when Frau Dr. Elferding proposed for discussion by the Psychoanalytic Society of Vienna a dream recorded by Roseger, which is here reprinted. In Wahlheimat, volume 11, Roseger writes as follows in his story Fremdgemacht. I usually enjoy healthful sleep, yet I have gone into repose on many a night. In addition to my modest existence as a student and literary man, I have for long years dragged out the shadow of veritable tailor's life, like a ghost from which I could not become divorced. It is not true that I have occupied myself very often or very intensely with the thoughts of my past during the day. A stormer of heaven and earth, who has escaped from the hide of Philistine, has other things to think about, and as a gay young fellow, I hardly gave a thought to my nocturnal dreams. Only later, when I formed the habit of thinking about everything, or when the Philistine within me began to assert itself a little, did it strike me that when I dreamed at all, I was always a journeyman tailor, and that in that capacity I had already worked in my master's shop for a long time without any pay. As I sat there beside him and sewed and pressed, I was perfectly well aware that I no longer belonged there, and that as a burgess of the town I had other things to attend to, but I was always on a holiday, or away in the country, or so I sat beside my master and helped him. I often felt far from comfortable about it, and regretted the waste of time which I might have employed for better and more useful purposes. If anything was not quite correct in measure and cut, I had to put up with scolding from my master. Of wages there was never a question. Often, as I sat with my bent back in the dark workshop, I decided to give notice and take myself scarce. Once I actually did so, but the master took no notice of me, and next time I was sitting beside him again and sewing. How happy I was when I woke up after such weary hours. And then I resolved that if this intrusive dream should ever occur again, I would energetically throw it off and would cry aloud, "It is only a delusion. I am lying in my bed and I want to sleep." And the next night I would be sitting in the tailor shop again. So it went on for years with dismal regularity. Once, when the master and I were working at Appelhofer's, at the house of the peasant with whom I began my apprenticeship, it happened that my master was particularly dissatisfied with my work. "I should like to know where in the world your thoughts are," he cried, and looked at me sullenly. I thought the most sensible thing to do would be to get up and explain to the master that I was working with him only as a favor, and then take my leave. But I did not do this. I even submitted when the master engaged an apprentice, and ordered me to make room for him on the bench. I moved into the corner, and kept on sewing. On the same day another journeyman was engaged, a bigoted fellow. He was a Bohemian, who had worked for us 19 years earlier, and then had fallen into the lake on his way home from the public house. When he tried to sit down there was no room for him. I looked at the master inquiringly, and he said to me, "You have no talent for tailoring. You may go, you are a stranger henceforth." My fright on that occasion was so overpowering that I woke. The grey of morning glimmered through the clear windows of my familiar home. Objects to art surrounded me. In the tasteful bookcase stood the eternal Homer, the gigantic Dante, the incomparable Shakespeare, the glorious Goethe, all radiant and immortal. From the adjoining room resounded the clear little voices of the children who were waking up and prattling to their mother. I felt as though I had rediscovered that idyllically sweet, peaceful, poetical, and spiritualized life in which I have often, and so deeply, been conscious of contemplative human happiness. And yet I was vexed that I had not given my master notice first, but had been dismissed by him. And how remarkable this seems to me! Since that night when my master made a stranger of me, I have enjoyed restful sleep. I no longer dream of my tailoring days, which now lie in the remote past, which in their unpretentious simplicity were really so cheerful, but which, none the less, have cast a long shadow over the later years of my life. In this series of dreams of a poet who, in his younger years, had been a journeyman tailor, it is hard to recognize the domination of the wish fulfillment. All the delightful things occurred in his waking life, while the dream seemed to drag along with it the ghost like shadow of an unhappy existence which had long been forgotten. Dreams of my own of a similar character enable me to give some explanation of such dreams. As a young doctor, I worked for a long time in the Chemical Institute without being able to accomplish anything in that exacting science, so that in the waking state I never think about the unfruitful and actually somewhat humiliating period of my student days. On the other hand, I have a recurring dream to the effect that I am working in the laboratory, making analysis and experiments and so forth. These dreams, like the examination dreams, are disagreeable, but they are never very distinct. During the analysis of one of these dreams, my attention was directed to the word analysis, which gave me the key to an understanding of them. Since then, I have become an analyst. I make analyses which are greatly praised. Psychoanalysis, of course. Now I understand. When I feel proud of these analyses in my waking life and feel inclined to boast of my achievements, my dreams hold up to me at night those other unsuccessful analyses of which I have no reason to be proud. They are the punitive dreams of the upstart, like those of the journeyman tailor who became a celebrated poet. But how is it possible for a dream to place itself at the service of self criticism in its conflict with parvenu pride, and to take as its content a rational warning instead of a prohibited wish fulfillment? I have already hinted that the answer to this question presents many difficulties. We may conclude that the foundation of dream consisted at first in arrogant fantasy of ambition, but that in its stead only its suppression and abasement has reached the dream content. One must remember that there are masochistic tendencies in mental life to which such an inversion might be attributed. I see no objection to regarding such dreams as punishment dreams, as distinguished from wish fulfilling dreams. I should not see in this any limitation of the theory of dreams hitherto as presented, but merely a verbal concession to the point of view to which the convergence of contraries seems strange. But a more thorough investigation of individual dreams of this class allows us to recognize yet another element. In an indistinct subordinate portion of one of my laboratory dreams, I was just at the age which placed me in the most gloomy and most unsuccessful year of my professional career. I still had no position and no idea how I was going to support myself, when I suddenly found that I had the choice of several women whom I might marry. I was therefore young again, and, what is more, she was young again, the woman who has shared with me all these difficult years. In this way, one of the wishes which constantly gnaws at the heart of the aging man was revealed as the unconscious dream instigator. The conflict raging in other psychic strata between vanity and self criticism had certainly determined the dream content, but the more deeply rooted wish for youth had alone made it possible as a dream. One often says to oneself, even in the waking state, "To be sure, things are going well with you today, and once you found life very hard. But after all, life was sweet in those days, when you were still so young." Another group of dreams, which I have often myself experienced, and which I have recognized to be hypocritical, have as their content a reconciliation with persons with whom one has long ceased to have friendly relations. The analysis constantly discovers an occasion which might well induce me to cast aside the last remnants of consideration for these former friends, and to treat them as strangers or enemies. But the dream chooses to depict the contrary relation. In considering dreams recorded by a novelist or poet, we may often enough assume that he has excluded from record those details which he felt to be disturbing and regarded as unessential. His dreams thus set us a problem which could be readily solved if we had exact reproduction of the dream content. O. Rank has called my attention to the fact that in the Grimm's fairy tale of the valiant little tailor, or the seven at one stroke, there is related a very similar dream of an upstart. The tailor, who has become a hero and has married the king's daughter, dreams one night while lying beside the princess, his wife, about his trade. Having become suspicious, on the following night she places armed guards where they can listen to what is said by the dreamer and arrest him. But the little tailor is warned and is able to correct his dream. The complicated process of removal, diminution, and inversion, by which the effects of the dream thoughts finally become the effects of the dream, may be very well survived in the suitable synthesis of completely analyzed dreams. I shall here discuss a few examples of affective manifestations in dreams, which will, I think, prove this conclusively in some of the cases cited. End of section 36. Recording by Lambda.